Today's show is brought to you in partnership with Clearmotive Marketing. I co-founded this high-impact creative agency over 15 years ago. We deliver marketing that matters to our clients through our three-pillar approach. Number one, research that delivers actionable insights. Two, creative that attracts and engages new customers. And three, which is the backbone of our client success, the people, process, and technology that ensure efficient, consistent, high-quality results. We have great ideas and incredible creative, which is expected from a national agency. What makes us different is that we also simplify workflow, use technology to speed up projects, and recommend activities that achieve higher returns. There is a mountain of work that happens behind the scenes to produce what our clients take for granted, and that's exactly how we want it. Because great creative combined with well-organized operations is why we have such long-standing relationships. For example, Honda Canada has renewed their contract with us annually for the last 12 years. Our clients are market leaders, so they're incredibly competitive. Efficiency, performance, and consistent results are the only way to get to the top and to stay there. If you're not getting the consistent results you need, I can help. Reach out to me on LinkedIn or check out clearmotive.ca. Hello and a warm Collisions YYC. Welcome to my guest this morning, Mr. Jay Kleinsasser. How are you, Jay?
Good, Tyler. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. Thanks for coming on. The world conspires. We get introduced. 1 degree of separation. My guests have heard it 1,000 times. I love Calgary and Western Canada specifically for the ability to get connected. And for me to have conversations with people that are working in spaces or doing things that I'm like, I need to know more about that. So before we dive down that rabbit hole, JLK Resource Management, you're the principal there, which I understand is your consulting company. Yep. And I've been creeping on your LinkedIn. You have been in the energy sector in one way or another. Let's not talk about years, but for many, maybe a couple decades. Give us a little bit of quick, what role does JLK serve in the world? What do you do? What are you passionate about? And then let's get into this whole carbon capture, utilization, and storage topic.
Sure. So like you said, I've been in the industry for a while, primarily focused on resource development, exploitation, getting resources out of the ground economically, project management, project identification, that kind of thing. So I've done that for almost all of my career. In my last job, I was one of the few people who was doing a CO2 injection scheme of any sort. So in the province right now, there's only 3 of them approved. Actually, 4 schemes approved. I was in charge of 2 of them. And through that period, I was probably doing more reporting than anyone else in the province has done, probably in the last 20 years.
Okay. Can I pause you for a second? The word scheme to me always seems problematic because it seems like some kind of a hustle.
Right.
And I could be completely ignorant, I probably am, to ask that question. But when you call it a scheme, it sounds to be like I'm already looking around to see if anybody's watching or we're trying to get away with something.
Right.
Or is that just the proper terminology for this space? My audience is probably rolling their eyes. I've been asking that.
Yeah, so it's probably the right terminology. A lot of people use it, right? An injection scheme, whether it's water flood or CO2 or municipal floods, they call it a water flood scheme or a plan. So I'll try to call it plan from now on.
No reason to change the vernacular. I'm, as everyone knows, I'm endlessly curious. And rather than going past where my mind's going, scheme, is that even I don't understand that word. No. So in this context, it is accurate. It's not, no one's running some kind of hustle here. It is not. It's a scheme, not a scam.
Yeah. So when I say scheme, it's a defined project area that operates within a planned schematic. Right, so scheme coming off of schematic is probably where I would.
Thank you for clearing my challenge with words. Yeah. So please go ahead, Jay. Go ahead. Thank you.
It's not a one-to-one scheme to schematic like that, right? But it's close enough, right?
Okay, I understand. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. So talk to me a
little bit about that. You were working on a project where that was a big portion of it, or one of the leading projects. Yeah. And you said there's only 4 approved in Alberta. So maybe just circle around that and talk to me a little bit about our landscape, what you were doing, and kind of what it looks like we'll just start with Alberta on a province-wide perspective.
Right. So on the province-wide perspective, it's the next big thing, really, in terms of emissions management, emissions planning, that kind of thing. Okay. So the schemes I was talking about, the plans I was talking about, right, there's the Shell Quest, there's the Enhanced Energy EOR, and then there's a couple outside of Pinoca, and then there's one that's injecting CO2, but they're not getting credits or doing any reporting on it, just outside of Joffre. So there's actually 5 of them running. One of them doesn't report and really participate in the schemes or the credit aspects of it. Okay. And like I said, I was kind of running 2 of them from a reporting and an operations point of view. And for the CO2 EORs, it's really the basis of the regulations for what the sequestration is going to look like, right?
Okay.
The idea with sequestration is it's going to go on the ground and not come back up. Where with
Yep.
the EORs, some of it comes back up, you catch it and you put it back down again and you recycle it. So
Because the reality is we pull these fuel sources out of the ground, we burn them or use them, releases carbon into the atmosphere. The challenge is that we're doing that at an accelerated rate. So, hey, why don't we put it back down the hole to just really oversimplify it?
Especially if you have a big concentrated source, which is where all the ones are right now, right? They're plants that have pretty pure, relatively pure CO2 coming off. It's relatively easy to capture. Sometimes it has to be transported relatively far, which is where a lot of the cost is. But the capture piece, you can do that in a lot more places than we have now. And Alberta's got fabulous opportunities for it.
Okay. So obviously how it's located geographically makes a big difference because you're going to transport this in tanker trucks. Like how does it move? Oh, it's only going to be moved in pipeline. Okay. So you need to be somewhere where you have access to a corridor.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So you have to build the pipeline, which is one of the big delays for a lot of people.
Okay.
Right?
Because it is a specific type of pipeline to move this product.
It has to operate within certain parameters, right? It has to be constructed a certain way. CO2 itself, once you've processed it and put it in a pipeline, it's actually pretty benign to the pipeline. Like almost pure CO2 on its own. People go, oh, it's corrosive. You think of the Coke, right? Which is you drop a screw in it or something and it dissolves in a couple days or whatever. And that's because there's water and CO2. So if you have that in a pipeline, it can be a problem. But corrosive. An operating CO2 line is almost all just pure CO2, and there's nothing in there to cause corrosion or issues. You still have to monitor it and make sure it's all good. But it's very benign once it's processed and put in a pipeline.
Okay, so from a long-term maintenance and kind of sustainability perspective, that infrastructure and that cost and that outlay, and we all know there's the concerns around pipelines, that's going to be able to serve its role for a long period. Successfully. And
you just got to make sure that on the upsets or whatever, you take care of it, make sure it stays clean. But yeah, one of the big pushbacks on CCS right now is, what about the pipeline? What about the transportation? That's probably not too big of an issue, right? Like I said, it's very benign once it's in there. As long as the pipeline is constructed properly, you put a couple safeguards in place, it shouldn't be too bad, really, from a project management perspective.
Okay, just to get clarity, CCS or CCUS,
yes,
all part of the same family. Carbon capture storage or carbon capture utilization and storage.
Yeah.
That utilization is curious to me because that adds a whole other set of variables there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So utilization sometimes means you put it in cement, you trap it in rocks, you turn it into a polymer, right? So you're probably still capturing it and transporting it somewhere else to use it. You might be generating that use right at the source, but in most cases you're moving it somehow, processing it somehow, and then turning it into a different product.
Because then it becomes the feedstock for another output, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's the U part, and then the S part is sequestration or storage, which means pumping into the ground and locking it into geology for hundreds of millions of years.
And so never to be disturbed. And so I'm going to pump that into a formation that I've extracted something out of before, like I'm using an existing, or no? You're shaking your head no. Okay. So all right, good. See, this is exactly what I wanted to get into here.
So the current plans are to put it in non-reservoir rocks.
Okay.
So things that, we've drilled for 70 years, a long time ago, even nowadays, you don't really know what's in the rock sometimes until you drill it and you test it. And so we have a history of roughly 70 years where we poke holes, you go, okay, down to this depth, there's rocks that could hold oil and gas, but there's none in there and it's just salty water or something else you don't want to produce. So at this point in time, the big focus is on putting it into those reservoirs that have never produced anything.
Oh, interesting.
Putting it into old reservoirs is probably one of the next steps because we have massive empty reservoirs that we've produced a lot of oil and gas out of over time. They have a few extra complications generally, but so right now it's saline aquifer is what they call it, right? And so that's the big focus of almost all the projects right now.
So this was a well that was drilled and it came up dry. There was nothing worth producing to take out of that hole.
Yeah, and in most cases, right? So that well was drilled sometime in the last 70 years. They're not going to use that well, but the information that they got from it tells them that, hey, here's a place where you could store CO2. And so you drill new wells with new technology and new construction. and keep it
Okay,
from
I
there going
understand.
forward. Yeah.
So it's actually the data set that came out of the fact that this was drilled 20 years ago. We know what was down there. We know what came up. And we made the decision to leave it. So now back to the geologists, there's less speculation around what's 2,000 meters down. And is there a certain depth? Like, are these deep holes? Does it really depend where it is in the province?
It really depends on where it is in the province. The closer you get to the mountains, everything is deeper. Okay. And the closer you get to Saskatchewan, everything is shallower. Actually, if you go to northeast Alberta, right? Like, it's actually all been scraped away by glaciers or erosion, and there's actually not much up there, right? So that's where you start to get to
you're
the
a lot
Canadian
closer
shield.
to those formations. Interesting.
Yeah, so they become a lot shallower the more north and east you go.
Which is less cost to drill, but potentially farther to transport. So it's probably a balance of the two things, right?
Yeah. And one of the things we'll probably talk about later is the Pathways Alliance, right? So they're going to take stuff out of out of Fort Mac, and actually take it down to Cold Lake to actually get the depth, because you want the depth, right? The depth is a little bit of your protection from leaking in the future. So you want to move it someplace where it's deeper and it has different barriers before it can come back to surface.
Okay. What does leaking look like? I got a leak in my tire. It goes flat, but the air that's in my tire is now in the atmosphere. It gets back out. Yeah. Is that really what we're talking about? Like, what's worst case scenario? Or when I say leaking, is that just simply it goes back into the atmosphere, which is what we were trying to alleviate in the first place?
Yeah. So again, we know from oil and gas exploitation that these reservoirs are pretty competent, right? So they have a cap and a seal somewhere in them that doesn't allow oil and gas to escape.
Okay.
That's the reason why we have to drill for it and not just kind of drive around and pick it up.
Not just stick a tap in the ground. Yeah.
Yeah. Which maybe is what they do in the oil sands, right? They actually just pick it off the ground almost.
Yeah. Okay. Different use case. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking specifically drilled wells.
We're putting it in places where you have to go deep and you have to go through barriers, and stuff is trapped in the ground, whether it's by shales or other minerals. There's a layer there that stuff can't flow through. And that's the stuff. That's the places where we want to put a couple of those in place above the CO2, so that other than the wellbore, there's no way for it to get in or out.
Okay, that makes sense, because there's a significant different stratifications of rock formations between there and wherever you end up being the base of your bore. How do we know how much it'll hold? Is again speculation? Does this come off some of the original data? Because even if I tap into reserve, there's only so much product will come out, and then it will run out, or there's only so much I can access effectively with modern technologies, which arguably is what's changed so much in the energy sector over the years. Better and better technology to get more and more. Is this the same? Do I just reverse the thinking to way oversimplify that?
Almost.
Okay.
Right. So part of the reason why oil and gas works the way it does is because gas floats on top of oil floats on top of water. And so it's some way in a lot of places, there's a lot more space in there than just the oil and gas space, because there's water space, right? And actually what we're doing is putting stuff in the water space. In the simplest context, what we're going to do is pump CO2 down. It's going to start off becoming bubbly water for a long time, right? Okay. Just like a pop or something, right? Or tonic water or whatever.
It's like a big soda stream. Yeah, I got it.
And then as it moves away from the wellbore, eventually it mixes with other minerals and it actually turns into rock, right? So it's going to react with magnesium and calcium and other minerals in there, and it's going to calcify over time and actually become a part of the rock versus bubbly water. Okay. And there's different places where it becomes rock faster, and there's different schemes. There's actually an injection scheme that's actually based on it turning into rock within days, where most of it's going to be over years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And obviously, once it turns into rock, then there's a sense of permanence to that equation.
Yeah. It's absolutely permanent at that point. Well, it's still bubbly water. If someone else drills a well or something happens to your well, potentially you could have a leak. But well, construction techniques, especially modern ones, are much better than they used to be, and so it can be controlled a lot better maybe than it could in the past.
Right, because back to your original point, I might be taking data from a well that was drilled 20 years ago, but I'm not using that bore. I'm putting in a new well, I'm drilling in that area, but I'm taking the data to so it reduces my risk of knowing, oh, geez, we drilled in the wrong spot. That goes down, but everything I'm using is using modern drilling techniques, to your point.
Yeah.
So it increases safety, reduces risk.
Yeah. The one risk that probably still exists is because there's no hydrocarbons at that level. You drilled your first well, maybe you drilled the second well, but you didn't drill third, fourth, hundreds of wells. So productive horizons have hundreds of wells in them. These non-productive wells have relatively few. So there's a little bit of doubt about what's going on in between them. that you can resolve with seismic or other things. But in general, that, these horizons are very extensive.
Okay.
And the risk is maybe you find a barrier of some sort between them where you thought, oh, I have, 100 gigatons of CO2 storage space, but it's actually 50 here and 50 here, because it's never as homogeneous as you think. That's one thing we know from production side of things, is reservoirs are never quite as clean as you think they are. So you might need to drill out a couple wells more than you originally planned to, but you do know that you're going to get a lot into that original well in general.
Okay. And part of it is that using that original data to be able to then speculate or extrapolate on this is how much room we have here. So therefore, is it worth putting the infrastructure in to get the carbon here?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it is just economics and long-term horizon. Is this worth it financially as a project?
And in the short term, the issue becomes, when does the CO2 get captured? How much does it cost me to put that pipeline in place?
Yeah.
And when does the timing of all those things work so that I can start making my money back? Because if you drill a well, build a pipeline, and it's 5 years before somebody builds the capture plant, you have this unproductive capital sitting there. And that's actually probably the big risk in industry in Alberta right now, is when do all these things work together to get something in the ground to start generating credits to make the project viable?
Interesting, because if I think about the other side of the extraction side of the energy sector, there's already pipelines, there's already customers, there's already, for the most part, access to market. But we're flipping this around, and how do we get the dominoes to line up in the right order?
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And is that kind of, in terms of the stage we're at with this, is that one of the main challenges? Is that one of the things that are holding us back? And we'll get into kind of what's getting in the way of this, because it sounds positive when you hear about it, but yet these things take years, and these are massive projects, right? These don't get spun up overnight.
Yeah. And that's when I've talked to the, so Alberta has a series of hub proposals going through right now.
Yep.
The number is something like 27 hubs. Let me pull it up really quick. I grabbed this.
And these would be centers where literally kind of hub and spoke models where producers of CO2 would be able to send their product to then be able to distribute it to these reservoirs.
Yeah. So there's 27 under consideration right now. And just like everything else, right? Here's an idea. Let's all get our ducks started anyway. And a bunch of them will probably never happen. But a lot of them are kind of stuck at that midstream space right now, where somebody wants to build a plant and a pipeline, and they're just like, okay, I know where I want to put the CO2 tomorrow or a year from now when it's ready to go. I just don't know when I can fill my pipeline and who's actually going to be my customers yet. So that's one of the issues.
I see. And these producers of CO2 are going to pay. This is where we get into the credits and how that all works. Yeah. How does somebody make money in this game? Make money versus even just cover costs. How does this become viable financially?
Right. So there's one of two ways. One is the company who's generating the CO2 is probably paying some sort of tax on it.
Yes.
Right. So they will pay less tax by putting it in the ground and putting it through this infrastructure and into the ground. Somebody who's not connected to the infrastructure can basically say, I'm going to buy your CO2 credits.
Yep. Which is the whole offset mindset of this, right? And ultimately we'll reduce because we're being sensitive and like anything, what gets measured gets, or what gets taxed gets dealt with.
Exactly, right? So you're putting 100 tons a day or whatever it is into the ground, and they're going to say, hey, I'm going to buy 90 of those to offset my tax burden somewhere else, or be a good corporate citizen or whatever. So if somebody wants to buy your credits or generate their own credits to offset their own tax, at the end of the day, it's all somebody trying to offset their carbon footprint and costs either through taxes or Good Samaritan or whatever reason they want to buy those CO2.
I'm moving the money into different buckets. Maybe I'll get a savings if I offset versus if I just have to pay straight tax. But the real win is I have some type of a facility that's producing carbon, and I'm close to a pipeline, or I have access, or it works out for me. I'm in a real strong position to be able to then treat that as the currency that it's going to become. Right.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So when you look at it, when we look at jurisdictionally, like, obviously Alberta, we have a lot of know-how around this, and we have a lot of holes in the ground that have been done, that have been drilled over 70 years. Are we best positioned, like when you look globally at like who's doing it well, what's happening, whether it's south of the border or internationally? What's the world stage look like for this carbon journey?
Right. So in Alberta, right, we do know, for example, that we have this deep saline aquifers that cover massive parts of the province. And there's more than one level of them, right? So you have the very bottom level, which is the Basal-Cambrian, And then you have a couple other layers on top that might be Ledukes or something else. And so you have these multiple stacks here in Alberta, which have enormous storage capacity. And, they go into Saskatchewan and maybe a tiny bit into Manitoba and, BC as well, right? So Western Canada has this huge stack. And the Western Canadian Sedimentary Base is just one part of a trend that goes from Alaska all the way down to Texas.
Okay.
So they have that same potential going down through there. They have a bit different jurisdictional thing going on where they have, through the Inflation Reduction Act, they have set prices for CO2 going into the ground, depending on how you're going to use it. So they've already set those parameters. They're legislated in place and people are working on them now.
Okay.
Where Canada has more of we're going to have a price on carbon. And we do have a price on carbon and it's going to go up over time.
Yes.
The price it's at right now probably doesn't support the level of infrastructure we need.
Okay. But if we bring that on too fast, too soon, it would have too much of a negative impact economically, right?
Yeah. So we do need some sort of government support to guarantee prices to put infrastructure in place.
Well, because we're ultimately trying to mitigate risk of these large capital projects, right?
Yeah. So they have all that stuff going on through the states. They have, a lot of ethanol production. So they're making ethanol for whatever other chemical use, whether it's blending into gasoline or whatever. So right now they're doing a lot of consolidating ethanol plants in the Midwest to put in the ground. And again, because they already have this price on carbon, they know exactly what they're going to get. They know the projects are more or less viable.
It increases the level of I feel more, there's more assurance. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on price, yeah. And then, there's the other surface stakeholder issues, which everybody faces everywhere. As you go across the world to the UK and the North Sea, so everybody that produced North Sea gas or oil, so the UK, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, most of their schemes are based on actually putting stuff back into those old depleted reservoirs in the North Sea.
Okay.
And so they're working on that now. And
which you mentioned here, that's kind of a second tier option for us. Like we're focusing on, because we have had so much exploration and so much in the last 70 years, that sounded to you like it sounded the way you described it. That's more of a stage 2 approach here in Alberta.
Yeah. And part of it is because the reservoir is a little bit different. So in Alberta, our reservoirs are a little bit flatter, a little bit less productive. And you have to put in, say, 1,000 wells. To get the oil and gas out, where in the North Sea you're putting in maybe 10. So
I see. Just the way that it functions. I understand.
So they can turn it around a little bit easier. For us, you have to make sure that the 1,000 wells are all good condition, not going to cause issues. For them, they only have to make sure 10 wells are
because every well is a point of failure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when I say North Sea, I'm talking offshore platforms, right? Yep. So there's already a much higher level of well design and things that go into those. Okay. So even when they abandon them, it's different because and the costs are different. Right? Like it's a whole order of magnitude of cost, right? So maybe here we can drill a well for $300,000, drill it, complete it, tie it in, get it on production. For them, those wells are tens of millions of dollars.
Of course.
So the design.
What about getting your carbon out there?
So again, all they're going to do is turn around the pipelines that are already there.
Just use the same infrastructure they already have.
And in some cases, they might actually put it onto a ship and send it to the platform because a lot of those
it's large enough and economical enough to move it in such large.
Yeah. So you don't want to send truck loads like you kind of mentioned early, but ship loads maybe, right? So they can send it all on ship. And the UK has done a pretty good job of, at least on their first phase, putting in place kind of pricing guarantees or timing guarantees. So again, as we mentioned, right, you can build the infrastructure and you can build the capture facility and not actually have somebody that's built the source or completed the source yet. So the UK government's kind of said, okay, we're going to backstop the infrastructure or actually the capture plant to go, okay, if your capture plant is built, you spent $200 million building a plant, we'll pay you as if you're capturing CO2, even if maybe the infrastructure is not there yet.
Oh, interesting.
And that's just to keep people from sitting on their hands going, I'm worried about the timing, So the UK
is
all
about mitigating. They're helping mitigate risk.
Yeah. So they've done a little bit more on building a process that says, okay, what's the timing risk? What's the pricing risk? What's the, where will people sit on capital because they're worried about risks? And they've built mechanisms on their first phase to take care of a lot of that. And then they're hoping once it's all demonstrated that they don't need that for the second and third phase, right?
Yeah, which makes sense. It starts to become self-sufficient.
Yeah.
Well, there's so many examples of where, when the government plays the role that I think they should play, but that's my own opinion, of they actually are mitigating risk. They're helping private sector do what it does really, really well. And they're creating a legislative and regulatory and financial environment that allows private sector to exactly de-risk where my capital goes. But it doesn't sound like we're there yet in North America, certainly not in Alberta.
No. So we've got little hubs where things have been, so hubs maybe not the right word in this context, little places where people have been picked for, here's a subsidy, here's support on a pipeline or infrastructure, but not in terms of this is how it works to make this system work. It's okay. Well, we built the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line. That was highly subsidized by the Alberta government, and the capture plants were there. The idea now is that everyone wants to feed into it, but there's probably not quite enough. There's a little too much risk for people to build the feeding connections into it, right? So again, what is the risk? What is my price to move it? What is my price for getting it in the ground? Those two pieces are still missing a little bit.
And from a capital perspective, these are projects that we're looking 10, 15, 20-year paybacks. Like we've got to have a long-term horizon of some pretty good security of what we're going to get into before we drop our smooth, 250 million or more.
Yeah,
or more.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's people are treating it like a midstream project. So midstream project is designed to make a bit of a return over a 50-year life and a good return over a 50-year life, right? But it's got to last 50 years. So there's not much guarantee in Canada
but midstream,
right now.
fundamentally, just for easy, being the refining, like typically would be a refinery would be in midstream, correct? Where they're actually converting it, or am I oversimplifying my terms?
So refinery would be a good one. Usually a refinery is a third party. So there's a producer, and then they have their own infrastructure to a point. And then from that point forward to it gets to market, there's generally another third party processor. Which is the
midstream.
And, or somebody that treats it or whatever. Yeah, that's the midstream, right? So they take it from the owner's infrastructure to the sales point. And so TC Energy, Enbridge, they're midstream companies. And
large pipeline.
The big ones
from me. So literally, are we correct to be thinking about it the same way, or does that create any issues when we're treating it like something that maybe it is similar, but it's a little bit different? You know what I mean?
So you have to think of it the same way as the midstreamers do, because producers, they produce a well, and wells have a high value product right away, and a well will pay out, ideally in 3 months.
I got it.
The best wells,
completely
right?
Completely different economics, especially now because we're getting so much more efficient cost-wise at drilling wells in Alberta.
And you probably don't drill a well if you think it's going to pay out in more than 2 years. Right? So if you load that into your infrastructure, it's so expensive for somebody to try to put something through it, and if you want to pay it out in 2 years, that no one's going to pay you $50 a ton for CO2 to move it from point A to point B, because that's the whole value of the CO2, right? So
I see. I got you. So we're still kind of early days in terms of how the numbers kind of shake out.
Yeah. And so it really is about, looking at what are those risks that keep people sitting on their hands and removing them a little bit, and just going from there.
Talk to me about, so let's just say for fun, I live in Ontario and I live in central Ontario. Maybe some might say I live in the center of the universe. I live in Toronto, and I'm really kind of concerned about this whole, I don't know. And what are we doing? And we're putting more stuff into the earth. And talk to me about some of the environmental or perceived concerns or otherwise. What's the counter narrative? Because listening to you talk, and I have enough friends in the energy sector, I'm like, this at an armchair distance makes sense to me. What should I be concerned about, or what might I be concerned about if I was sitting somewhere in the country where I'm just maybe not as comfortable with this energy cycle that we have here in Alberta?
Right. So I guess a couple things, right, is Alberta has probably the strongest regulatory environment in the world, right? So Norway might be close. BC is definitely close, but Alberta has the most rigorous overall regulatory environment in the world. I worked in Australia for 5 years. If the Australians didn't have a rule, they would go to Alberta's rules and adopt that as the interim rule for what they were trying to do, right? And if you said, this is how we do it in Alberta, the Australians would go, okay, right?
Interesting. So high degree of, so maybe a higher perceived credibility abroad than sometimes at home in our own country.
Yeah.
I'm being a bit cynical for sure, but there is a dialogue that does tend to shift on where you happen to be sitting when you bring this topic up at the bar.
Yeah. And Alberta has in the last 4 years put in a lot more regulation around fugitive emissions, methane leaks, all that kind of stuff. So there's a very rigorous process about knowing what you're emitting, right? So before you kind of estimated a bit based on reasonable assumptions, but you're probably not assuming your valve over here is leaking and actually find that it probably was leaking and you fix it and now it's not anymore, right? So we do a lot more leak detection and repair in the last 4 years than, again, probably anywhere in the world, right? The US, in most cases, like through Texas and stuff, there's places where they just flare the gas, they just burn it, they don't even think about capturing it. Where Alberta's had rules for a long, long time about you always have to capture gas if you can in any kind of reasonable economic scenario.
Okay.
So we capture gas, we capture our emissions, we track our emissions far better than anywhere. And the only exception is places where you have, again, one massive well that produces more than half of Alberta altogether, and you can watch that one thing and know exactly what it's doing. Where in Alberta we have hundreds of thousands of wells, right? And you got to do a little bit of assumptions over the broad distance. So we have the best regulations in the world.
Talk to me about, is there any concerns? Like, is this completely safe? Let's talk the physical world, the environmental world. We're pumping something down into the ground and hoping it just stays there for the next, to your point, 1,000 to million years. Is that as easy and cut and dried, oversimplifying, as it sounds? Or are there some complexities? Are there some risks? And are those risks real or otherwise exaggerated?
Yeah, so everything has some kind of risk, right? I don't ever want to say there's no risk, but it's relatively low if you've got good technology and good processes. Okay. So
back to being in a strong regulatory environment, which equals good processes and good technology.
And just the regulatory process says when you build a well, especially an injection well, here's all the things you have to do to make sure that this is a suitable well, right? So you have to do, you have to get your injection scheme approved that says, I know the reservoir is competent. Then you have to get your wellbore approved that says, I know that this wellbore is not going to be a source of a leak. And then you, particularly with CCS, you have to have a verification process over time that says, I know things aren't leaking and escaping. So the part people need to remember is, these reservoirs are typically more than 1,000 meters deep. So they're pretty far down. They're in horizons that have held some sort of fluid for dozens of millions of years to hundreds of millions of years, right?
Just
so
forever.
So the zone that people are mostly going to inject into right now is a zone that's 500 million years old. So it's held fluids in it that haven't escaped for 500 million years. So what we're going to do is drill a well into it, make sure that well is well constructed, and inject CO2 into that thing, right? Then as you come up the wellbore, there's all these natural barriers between the point you're injecting at and the surface. And again, this is the water down there. If you drank it, it wouldn't necessarily kill you, but it'd make you really sick because it's so salty.
It's not water. Right? It's not the water in the context of the glass of water sitting on my desk right
now. No, it's hundreds of times more saline than that, right? Okay. So it's not water you're ever going to use. It's not water you're ever going to want to use. It's probably water you could never afford to process to be usable. Okay. And so that's the horizons people are putting stuff into. Okay. So there's natural barriers that have existed for 500 million years. They're long, aerial extensive barriers that have prevented the zone from mixing with the one above or the one below, right? So we know that these things are competent and solid and stable because they've existed for a long time. And because these horizons particularly haven't had oil and gas, we don't have thousands of old wells into them. We have dozens, if dozens. So you can control the risk on those existing wells pretty well and make sure that they're not going to be a source of leak. And even if they do leak, you can go and fix them relatively cheap because there's relatively few of them.
Thank you. This is super. What a great conversation, Jay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying going down this, literally down the rabbit hole. Maybe I'll say down the well. Maybe I'll say down the wellbore from now on. I think maybe it's more relevant. I think about all the things we're doing to obviously look at other sources of energy, renewables. I look at, it feels like that has no option but to be part of the mix when it looks at a decarbonized future and looking at our world differently. While we, yes, are looking for alternative energy sources, why we simultaneously still need access to fossil fuels because of this to keep the world running. Most of us are all for new sources of energy, but I'm not necessarily for turning off my lights if that's my only option. But this sounds like a really balanced approach. And I'm a bit jaded because I live in Alberta, so I'm very positive about the things we're doing here. But listen to you talk, this feels like a non-negotiable. It feels like one of the ways forward that does make a ton of sense. And thoughts on that? Do you agree? Is there anything like, what aren't we talking about here? Like, what is the elephant in the room that I just don't even know to ask about?
Right. So I guess I'll start by saying I'm a firm believer that the energy needs of the world are and solutions. They're not or solutions.
Not or but solutions.
Yeah. So while eventually you might phase out fossil fuels, that's not going to happen anytime soon. I know we had a conversation back in November, October with somebody talking a little bit about this, right?
Okay.
But just the energy density from wind and solar. And as we know, a month ago, we had the big alert here in Alberta.
We did, which we all had on pop up on our phones.
Yeah. And part of it is consumption, right? Like, so we can consume a little bit less, but do we not want to have our cell phones? Do we not want to have our laptops and our tablets, right? Because energy needs are just growing all the time. So we do need to be as efficient as we can be in terms of producing these energies. And for the sources we have that are a little bit more emissions intensive, we do need to find a way to capture the emissions and do something with them. Because the infrastructure is in place, right? To replace 2/3 or 3/4 of Alberta's power infrastructure in the next 10 years is completely infeasible.
Yeah, it's financially
what we can do is utilize existing pipelines, put in some new infrastructure, and take care of this emission issue, CO2 issue, by putting it in the ground. And like I said, putting it in the ground is the least risky part, I think, right? The rest of it is financial risk. We talked about transportation a bit. Transportation's not really very risky. If you processed it, you put it in. The place I was before that had those two projects, they used an old pipeline. So they started injecting in 2006.
Okay.
So 18 years of injection, absolutely no issues in the pipeline, which was mostly an old pipeline. So they converted, they converted an old one, made sure it was in good shape, had to build a little bit of connectors. And that thing was 42 kilometers long.
Okay.
So by the standards of what's being proposed for the other projects, 42 kilometers is not that long. But for this little company doing the stuff on its own, it was a big investment. And it's operated for 18 years with no issues in that CO2 distribution pipeline, with some of it being a pretty old part of an old system.
Okay. Interesting. I love how sometimes it's easy to think about this as something new, but you just said 18 years, 2006.
Yeah. So it is the oldest, longest running CO2 scheme for some sort of injection anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So going forward with Alberta, if you could wave a magic wand, I haven't asked the magic wand question for a while. If you're going to wave a magic wand in Alberta, specifically around carbon capture storage, and utilization and storage, what would it be? Is it regulatory? Is it more assurance from a financial perspective? Like, how would because I'm going to boldly say you seem very pro that this is the right path. Yeah. What could we do to accelerate this and make it quote unquote better for all?
Right. So there needs to be one of two types of or probably both types of backstock. One is a little bit more pricing guarantee for people who are putting a big capital in to build an infrastructure project, and then something that alleviates the timing risk. Because again, if you build your pipeline, right, people don't want to build a capture plant unless there's a pipeline to put it into. So one of those things might get built first, especially if the pipeline needs to serve 4 different people who want to put stuff in the pipeline. So one of them might be ready to go when the pipeline's ready, but the other 3 maybe have a couple years delay. But that pipeline needs all 4 of them to be producing. So there needs to be some sort of backstop being on the timing for the infrastructure put in place. So pricing and timing risk mitigation is probably the 2 biggest things. And then the reservoir risk, again, is relatively small. So it's more about how to get the surface stuff done so the downhole stuff can happen.
I see. In your mind, where does the money come from to this? Is this local money? Is this international money? Like, who's investing in who's building, who's putting in the 250 million or 200 million? Or I'm just picking a random number for the sake of it. Where's that money coming from to do this? If all of a sudden we create an environment that's secure, that there has a little bit more backstop around pricing, we have a little more backstop around timing, does global money come in to take advantage of this? Or is this something we're funding locally?
So global money might come in to build the infrastructure because they think there's a return to be had. Yep. Right. So the Pathways Alliance, they're looking at a $16 billion project.
Okay.
Right. $16 billion with, call it utility or midstream type returns. Yep. That attracts international money pretty well, as long as there's assurances on that rate of return, right? So
because you're like talking about a 50-year, you're looking immediately. That's long money. That's patient money, as they call it.
Yeah. So, the big infrastructure type investors, like the CPP is one of them, right? They invest in big ports or airports or whatever. This would be one of those type of investments where you want it to pay off over 50 years and do that. And so CPP is maybe a bad example, but there's foreign equivalents that might come in and do that type of stuff.
And that's the type of risk profile that attracts those type of very large scale investors that have long-term horizons. They're not looking to get their money out in 5 years.
Yeah. And then regardless of whether international money comes in or not, the business case all has to more or less exist within Canada, right? Mm-hmm. So unless somebody is buying Canadian credits to offset their UK emissions, which can happen, but mostly it's going to be Canadian companies want to offset Canadian emissions or reduce their tax burden. So most of the business case for it's going to happen in Canada. There might be some international trading or swaps or whatever they call them, but mostly it'll probably be a Canadian solution for Canadian problem to reduce emissions, to reduce tax burdens, that kind of thing.
Based on if we're going to extrapolate out in this kind of window of the amount of time and energy and cost that it takes to create this versus the pace in which carbon tax is going to increase. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that's increasing at a set rate over the next bunch of years, which I know is a very contentious issue versus what I'm hearing you talk. Like, these are projects, they don't get spun up overnight. There needs to be a little bit of a timeline. Are we playing a teeter-totter right now of balance of the cost and the negative impact versus having a viable solution to kind of offset that? It feels like we're on a bit of a razor's edge with this.
Definitely, right? So one of the big things is the government who says the prices are going up is potentially not very popular and could be replaced. Right?
That's very true.
So then you go, okay, well,
we can always hope, Jay. We can always hope.
Why would I put this infrastructure in place if the next government's going to destroy my business case?
Yeah, that's fair.
Right?
Yeah.
So there needs to be a bit more of a consolidated view, bipartisan.
So what you're telling
me
is this shouldn't be political. This actually should be played at a game that's a little more to actually truly bipartisan to be viable.
It needs to be, right?
I hear you. If this is a political football, we're just keep throwing it in the wrong direction.
So if there's going to be zero taxes, there's zero reason to build a pipeline.
Yeah.
If taxes are going to be $1,000 a ton, which is higher than predicted, then you want to build it tomorrow because
I understand.
You want to be in place for when that price happens, right? So there is a little bit of that going on. I do. Again, I said we need to be as efficient as possible. We need to reduce emissions.
Agreed.
Whether you think global warming is an issue or not, right? Like we just need to make sure that we're being as efficient in our production of hydrocarbons and energy as we can.
Yes.
And taking something out of the air and putting it in the ground in a place is safe, in a way is safe, is a pretty attractive way to get there. And business case or whatever, right? There's good optics view to doing that. And you can win. I don't know if you're ever going to win a lot of hearts by doing it.
I understand.
Because the people that don't like you are going to not like you no matter how well you're doing that work.
Yeah,
but at least you might convince some of the people who are undecided that it's you're not the bad guy after all.
Well, this is an opportunity from a hearts and mind perspective. You're not trying to the hardliners on either side aren't being convinced by new information, but there's a whole bunch of us that live in the middle going, I just don't know enough. I need to know more. And I think you referenced, just for the sake of it, my episode with Emily Kine, where we talk about the density of a molecule. Yeah. And we really kind of got into that rabbit hole. If anybody, I really recommend go back and listen to it. She was just a wealth of knowledge. And we started the conversation to talk about one thing and we ended up talking about almost all the things. but just the reality of what we demand as citizens, as a populace, and where that needs to come from, and how this can only ever be successful with a balanced conversation. But the media doesn't do balanced conversations very well. So let's be careful what we're getting led around by. I really appreciate the dialogue today, Jay, and your depth and wealth of knowledge on this topic and the ability to speak to it. I tried to come at it from as many different angles as I could, and you were able to respond with confidence on every one. And I was going to give you what you just said about, if we're going to be better and we're going to be more efficient, this is a really viable way to look at how we balance this journey out that we're on of energy abundance, not creating energy scarcity, which if we follow the rhetoric, we'll all have no power on a cold night pretty soon. But I don't think that's the right solution. I don't think anybody wants that.
No, and there's lots of great things out there. Geothermal could be a load thing, but it's geothermal in Alberta. If the wells are deep, right? So they're expensive. It's hard to get it out. It's not like Iceland where it just bubbles to surface every day.
Literally, you could just stick a pipe in the ground and it works.
Or you just go sit in and go, hey, I don't need a bath in my house anymore because I just had it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So
and I think really,
good.
Understanding where you are and what the geography is actually is a big reality. I appreciate even what you said about how deep it is here and how you would need that versus Saskatchewan, or as you work your way across the country, it slopes downward, right? Water runs that way for a reason because it's sloping that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. What is it, 125 feet above sea level in Montreal, or 33 or 3,400 feet above sea level in Alberta? That's a real factor. There's more between us and there, right?
Yeah. And almost all of it is some sort of sedimentary rock that separates us from the geothermal source, right? So.
Which is, if you want to take a drive into the mountains with anyone who happens to have taken geology anytime, being my wife, anytime in her life, I get the rock formations pointed out to me on a regular basis. It's quite interesting. But it's right there. You can see it as it's folded around the edge of these mountains. Yeah. And we live in a part of the country that I think sometimes makes it maybe not easier, but it's more in front of us to understand what we're dealing with versus I grew up in Quebec. These were not conversations I ever had with anybody about anything. Price of gas at the pump was about where the energy conversation started and stopped. That was a few years ago, though. I will admit.
It's probably still every day now, right?
Yes, I get into some heated conversations with my friends from Quebec when I go back there in the summer. But then I just present my wife, who's worked in oil and gas for 20 years, because she can funnel the argument of all the things the energy sector is doing to be a proper energy citizen than I can, for sure. But it is an endless debate. And something like this is powerful. And I love what you said about, like, we have one of the most rigid, stringent, and high quality regulatory environments. Like, we do things really well here. And I do think that's a story that needs to be told over and over. And I don't think you can tell that story too much because it doesn't get out in other parts of the country. Probably Australia takes our energy sector more seriously than some of our friends in Eastern Canada. And that's not a slag. It's just you don't get exposed to it. You just don't know.
Yeah. And the Australians do it because in some areas it's new to them too, right? So they're trying to build an industry. They built an industry on extraction that they didn't really have before. They had some, and they needed some place to use as a template. So they grabbed ours in a lot of cases. So.
Funny, you hear so many business stories like, oh, it's kind of like Australia or vice versa. That's funny. That comes up often. Jay, what's the best way for somebody to get a hold of you? That was a great conversation, and I'm certainly wanting more. If there's anybody listening, is it LinkedIn? What email? What's your preference?
I think LinkedIn, right? So I do check LinkedIn all the time. It's where I kind of get all my feeds. My news feeds are all set to go through LinkedIn for the topics and things I'm looking at. So I'm on there all the time. I respond to almost all my messages. It links to my email anyway, so if you just message me there, I'll get it to my email. So
amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's Jay, not Jason. I was doing Jason this morning. Like, why can't I find this guy? I'm like, it's because it's Jay. It's Jay.
Yeah, just Jay. J-A-Y.
Kleinsasser with an A. There's no U in there in case you want to throw it in. Just as you were joking earlier.
I'll spell it for you. It's Kleinsasser.
Amazing. And you're easy to find on LinkedIn. You've got a couple of really good links on there. You got a link from one of my friends over at McDaniel. You got a cool little report that I started digging into this morning from those guys.
It's you can almost do anything with that report. It's pretty cool in terms of the carbon market in Alberta, who's generating it, who's using it. It's a really cool report.
Yeah, I started going down, and I was like, okay, I gotta bookmark this and circle back on it. Yeah, I did a great job. But there's a fantastic amount of information out there. And thank you for coming on the show. That was the most comprehensive conversation we've had around carbon credits, carbon storage, carbon utilization on the show. And it was long overdue. So thanks, Jay. I really appreciate it.
Right. So one thing I would advise anybody who's listening, right? So if you're going to do a Google search on this, right, scroll down a bit The top responses are going to be very sensational articles, whatever, right?
Okay.
Try to get to the government sources. Try to get the industry sources, right? Use them with a grain of salt. Some of them are better than others, but
Okay.
get past the other two kind of things to the top of the search
Okay.
and try to find the actual data. There's tons of stuff I wish I could have mentioned and we don't have time for about
Of course.
good information, bad information.
The point of this
right?
show is to get people curious and go, hey, you know what? That was a cool perspective. I'm going to go learn a little bit more. Do you mean just because it's online, it doesn't mean it's always factual, or, it's not always based on science or the truth, Jay?
Yeah. So,
sorry, I'm a bit cynical about what I find online these days. But
just one really quick example. Sorry.
Sure.
I have to bring this one up. A couple of years ago, an article came out about Shell Quest project.
Okay.
And how the plant emits more CO2 than it captures. So the Quest capture plant emits more CO2 than it captures. And the real data is it captures 5 times as much CO2 as it emits for the capture portion. Okay. But it's only capturing. So the Shell Quest project is on their refinery in Edmonton. It's only capturing stuff off the hydrogen cracker.
I see.
And not 90% of the rest of the plant. So the whole plant emits more CO2 than is captured, but the CO2 capture plant is very efficient in terms of what it captures, what it's supposed to, and puts in the ground.
But because it's sharing a footprint with a larger facility it was really easy it's a true statement, but completely false or completely misleading. A true statement that's very misleading. I see.
Yeah. So, and that, if you actually search for Shell Quest, that's probably the first 5 or 6.
Interesting. Okay.
Google responses you're going to find. So just be careful when you are Googling it. If you find something weird, and for your listeners, if they want to hit me up on LinkedIn and ask me my perspective on it, sure, I'll get back to you and let me know what I think is good or bad about that perspective.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And I highly recommend, if it's not on your nightstand, Factfulness by Hans Rosling, where he dives deep into the misperception of the use of statistics, numbers, the perceived reality of what is versus how it's presented. It's quite a good book to help clean up your thinking when it comes to what you read.
Yeah, there's another one called Proofiness, and I can't remember who writes that one.
Oh, that's a guy. I like that.
But yeah, it's about misusing stats or presentations to make a point that's not necessarily true.
Yeah, I have heard that 67% of stats are made up, but I don't know if that's if you should trust that stat.
Yeah.
Jay, thanks for coming on today. It was a good conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me. Again, if anybody has questions, hit me up on LinkedIn and let me know.
Amazing. Thank you.